So I just want to start this video by saying, obviously these are just my opinions. They are not necessarily right or wrong. They are not necessarily what the community feels, what the wider audience feels, or the player base feels. It's just what I think. So without further ado, let's get into this.
Your turn, Yugi boy.
I think it's fair to say that Konami have been at the firing line for quite a while now. There's lots of pro players leaving, lots of casual players leaving, lots of people very annoyed and angry at the state of the game, lots of people very irritated with how things just in general run. They don't like the pricing, they don't like the support, they don't like the formats, they don't like the card design, they don't like the direction, all of those things. I think the only thing that I've actually complimented Konami on recently is the fact in which they have improved their European streaming setup, because that actually looked really, really cool. And I did, at one point, congratulate them on their communication. One, on the Forbidden Unlimited list, saying that it'll be the end of August. And two, on one of the videos where I complained about they need to handle their product releases better. All of a sudden, they said, we're going to start releasing on Tuesday and Thursday exciting new cards from the Megatins and fan favorites and things that people really want. And then proceed to show Blue Eyes and an Elemental Hero card that no one asked for. But today we're not talking about that. I want to talk about hand traps. Now, hand traps have been in the game for a very, very long time. I think the first hand trap you could arguably conceive was Karibo, because technically it is a card in your hands that activates when your opponent does something. You know, when you're taking down, you don't want to take damage, you discard the Karibo, right? But we fast forward a little bit. One of the more meta-defining and game-changing cards was Gore's Emissary of Darkness. Gore's literally changed the way everyone played the game. Before Gore's, people just attacked with monsters, and I should know, I played in that era. I played right at the start, so I have a very good understanding of how the games are played. Gore's literally forced you to change the way you play the game, because you shifted from just going, yeah, attack my monsters, to I am now going to start with the lowest attacking monsters, because now there's an actual reason and threat behind it. Because if you just attack with your biggest monster, if you have a 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, if you just attack with your 3,000, they drop Gore's, drop the token on 3k, you're like, can't get around that. So Gore's changed the way the game played. But Gore's wasn't broken, in my opinion. It was a big monster, and it was a scary thing. But it just meant you had to think about what you were doing. Because if your opponent had no cards on the field, Gore's was a threat. Obviously, if they had that back row, you have to just interact with the back row and deal with things like that. But you could play around it, you could plan for it. Fast forward all the way to 2024, and the hand trap situation is out of control. We have power cards that require no setup, they require no activation cost, and they linger. Things like Dimension Shifter, Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, Purlia, Droll and Lockbird, all these cards really don't require any setup. With Droll and Lockbird obviously being the one that when your opponent adds a card from their deck, but who isn't doing that these days? In my opinion, we can break it down to two different types of hand traps. You have your lingering hand traps and you have your situational activation hand traps. These are two very different things. Both get hate, but they're two very, very different things. And one of them, in my opinion, is severely hurting the game. So when I talk about situational hand traps, you have your Effect Veilers, your Ash Blossoms, your Imperms even, things that a certain thing has to happen for you to activate the card. The card will interact with your opponent, whether it negate, destroy, shuffle, whatever, and then that's it. There is no lingering effect. I think that is one of the biggest things. I think those cards, while they're not necessarily healthy, they're fine, because it's a one-on-one trade-off, typically. Now, I know there will be some exceptions to those rules, but I want to keep it as clear-cut as possible, just so we don't muddy the waters a little bit. Cut it down to lingering versus single activation and single interaction. Lingering effects are a problem. Any card, in my opinion, that has a blanket effect with no activation requirement, paralyzes your opponent from playing the game, is a problem. People like to talk about Dimension Shifter as one of the best examples of this. And I think that while people might be bored of talking about Dimension Shifter, it essentially encapsulates a playing style and a mechanic that it's a problem for Yu-Gi-Oh, in my opinion. I think it's just wrong. No matter what testing I do, no matter what deck I bring, if I have a deck that interacts with the graveyard, because that is how the deck is built, and that is how it plays. If I go first turn, and my opponent goes, yeah, I'm in your standby phase, I'm going to activate Dimension Shifter. Carry on. How do I play to that? How can I respond? How can I play around it? How can I play Yu-Gi-Oh? You just can't. Or you have to make some horrifically suboptimum boards, and they still have 4 cards and then drawing a 5th in their hand. They have essentially won the game because they drew something, because something was luck-based, and that is not good. Spooky Dogwood is one that obviously has become more of a problem card. The fact that you just infinitely keep gaining life points, otherwise your opponent just has to stop. There is the whole thing of, well, if your opponent drops it, not on an activation that would require a summon thereafter in a chain, they half their life points. But it's like, well, that's great and all, but life points don't typically really matter when you're talking about within 8,000, because you've got Tenpai running around that just seem to do infinite amount of damage. But a lingering effect that just allows you to essentially gain life points for every action that you do for summoning a monster seems very unfair. We've seen them get into 30, 40, 50,000 life points just because you're trying to play the game. Droll and Lockbird is another one. It's like, okay, well, if I have a deck like, I don't know, Drytron or something that adds cards from deck, that is the way that the deck runs, and that's the way the deck functions. To be able to just be Droll and Lockbird, I can no longer play the deck because that is the way that the deck is intended to run. That is a problem. Lingering card effects are a problem. I think that they are one of the biggest problems for how the game mechanics run and how the game functions. If we flip over to other cards, like the single activations, and I know people will complain about Ash Blossom Effect, Veiler, Imperm, and all of those. I genuinely don't necessarily think they're an actual problem, because one of the problems that we have in the game is going second is so painfully bad. Konami have tried their damnedest to balance going first versus going second, because if you win the die roll and you go first, unless you're Tenpai, you're already one up on your opponent, because it means that you have your chance to build your board and go, right, try and break it. And your opponent only has hand traps as a form of defense and interaction. Printing these very, very, very overpowered lingering card effects to help you going second on paper sounds good, because it means you stand a chance, they don't run over you and all this stuff. But we've gone too far that way now. We've gone so far that way that my opponent can drop a Mulchami on me, so they can just essentially Maxi draw. Not as bad as Maxi. It's going to get worse when the other one comes out, and it stacks pretty bad. They can turn off my graveyard. They can turn off my searching. They can turn off essentially life points or they make it irrelevant because they just keep gaining. It makes playing the game painful. So how do we fix it? Honestly, stop printing lingering card effects that have no activation requirement. If we just quickly speak about something that isn't a hand trap, and we talk about floodgates. Floodgates also suffer from that exact same problem, right? Skill drain is one of those that, for 1,000 life points, all monsters on the field effects are negated. Those types of invasive effects and lingering effects are still a problem. But they haven't been that much of a problem previously, right? Or have they? The problem is the number of kind of offensive lingering effects. It's just getting more and more and more and more, and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Every time Konami print these cards, there are just more added to the arsenal. So your deck, and as certain decks have a smaller deck core, if you look at Tenpai, a deck core's quite small. Like if you want to look at the amount of cards that they need to run. But there's so many one card starters, same with Snake Eye, they have a very big amount of their deck free, so they can fill it with all of the hand traps that they want, add in all of the offensive effects that linger on your opponent, and essentially just shuts them down. We saw it in the finals of the European Championships, And while I actually enjoyed watching that game, it was kind of quite an interesting spectacle. Mulchami and Spooky Dogwood showed why they're incredibly powerful cards. And guess what? They're both lingering effects. Hate to say I told you so. So how do you solve it? I'm not just going to sit here and complain without any solution, because that is just pointless. How do you solve it? Well, there needs to be almost a reset in the way that card designs are thought about. Honestly, I think you need to stop printing generic, lingering hand traps. They are a problem. They will always be a problem. Anything that is minorly good will be played. And if you really want to have something like this, you lock it down to archetypes that require an activation cost. Much like the single trade-off cards like Ash Blossom, so on and so forth, that require your opponent to do something for an interaction, because let's not forget, this is an interactive card game. You're just not playing solitaire, you're playing with your opponent. There needs to be an activation requirement, in my opinion, for you to play the card. If you keep things to archetypes, it means that it's not generic, it means it can't be splashed into and going down the cookie cutter route, just putting the best cards of the format and the best cards in the game into your deck and going, yeah, that kind of works. Problem with it is that deck building has become so kind of a little bit boring. And that's one of the biggest things I love about this game. I love the deck building aspect, the creativity. You can see that like all my historical deck profiles are not really meta decks. They're decks I enjoy and like. And you can build some pretty insane decks. It does destroy any form of creativity when anywhere from 9 to 12 to 15 of your cards are always the same hand traps with lingering effects, or even with just, your substantial one-off trade-off effects. There's an element and an amount of generic hand traps that will always be in the game. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think the amounts that are available is a bad thing. So how do you solve it? You ban them. Meh. You just ban them. Draw and Lock Birds, Dimension Shifter, Spooky Dogwood. You ban them. I genuinely think that is the fix. And then also from that, you need to change your game design, your card design with it. Because if you just ban them and then print them again, what's the point? I feel a little bit bad for the OCG with the fact that they have 2 Mulchamis and a Maxi. So like 6 to 9 cards are just draw cards, which is quite insane. So 2 things: you ban all the offensive lingering effects and you change the way you build your card design. That's honestly how you fix it, in my opinion. And that will probably go a long way to fixing game states. So I want to know what you guys think of hand traps, the lingering versus the one-off. I know this is going to cause a lot of disagreement. Totally fine. That's why we love this game. We can have those discussions and be civil about it, for God's sake. As I said, these are my own opinions. They're not right, they're not wrong. It's just what I personally think would fix the game, or at least take a step towards fixing the game. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section below. Make sure to give me a like, comment, subscribe, and I should catch you guys later.